Good evening, everyone. Today I'm joined by Wes Crawford, designer of Engine Thieves, which is currently on Kickstarter. Hi, Wes. How are you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm doing great. Doing great. Busy day. Lots going on with Engine Thieves, and it's been just a thrill of a ride. And heck, before you even answer or ask another question, I do want to thank you for all the work that you have done. You've brought a lot of creativity to the production, and Julian, he brought a lot of the detail when you all had to play tag team a little bit, and
Yes.
of course Bill for just even acknowledging and saying yes to doing a game like this, which is a little different. And then of course there's Billy, that nobody would ever get their game if it wasn't for him.
It's true.
So thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Okay, so for people who this is their first thing that they're seeing about Engine Thieves, what would you give as a little elevator pitch about what the game's about, what it plays like?
It's an historical game. You could call it a war game because violence can happen, but it's a covert war game. So you're trying to avoid that as much as possible. And it's a true story about Union raiders in 1862 that went behind enemy lines, Confederate lines in this case, and dressed as civilians. They got on a train as part of their mission. At the first stop, everybody got off for breakfast, and then they stole the train. And then the story really begins because they have to tear up track, burn bridges, cut telegraph wires, and sever all communications between Atlanta and Chattanooga so Union General Mitchell could attack it. It did not succeed in history, but you might do better.
That was one of my questions for later on, but we can jump right there. What's the best timeline result you've seen of somebody playing the game? Like, what's the best thing that they've achieved at the end?
Wow, there is a level we call Union strategic victory. And that's if you really burn a number of bridges and do everything you need to do, and you make it all the way back to Bridgeport to meet General Mitchell, and you haven't lost too many of your people because we did put a point victory points value on the lives of your soldiers. And the last person that did that was in a two-player game, and he did quite well and got a strategic victory. Is Bill Kalpak. Has we know him, and we know him from Expo, and
Yes.
he's designed his own games, all kinds of stuff he's done. Really great guy. And Greg Pittenger was, the developer of the game, was sort of coaching him a little bit because he never played it, and I was coaching his wife, and uh, we'll just say that Bill got extra good rolls or something, but he did pull that off against his wife and me.
Very nice. So on the other end of the spectrum, what's the absolute worst somebody's done?
It's possible at Big Shanty, that's where they stole the train, and they stole the train historically right next to 3,500 Confederate troops encamped right next to the railroad track. So it was like crazy daring. And I have seen people uh, get a little too risky there because there's a certain circumstances where you'll have a challenge there and they lose it, and all of a sudden these Confederates start shooting at them, and from there on, they don't completely get wiped out there, but it's such a handicap after that. It's very difficult. So
Yeah,
that's
the
the other
covert
end that
part
can
is
happen.
gone.
Yeah. Oh, you're definitely right. Yep.
Have players ever come up with combinations of actions that really just threw you for a loop? Because I know when the last time we played, we you had to fix a couple things on the like decouple the box car because we had put one on like a burning bridge or something. You're like, no one's ever done that. Like, that's our job. We cause chaos.
Oh man, we expanded it. In fact, this was Greg's, the developers, idea. Said, why don't we just put it that, yeah, if you burn it on the bridge, the actual, you can not just burn a box car there, you can actually steal a train on the bridge if you meet halfway in between stations, and then you can burn the bridge and crash the actual engine and
Oh
get a
my
few more
gosh.
victory points. So that has happened. I'm surprised. I think it happened recently twice in one game at the Games with Trains event in Baltimore at the B&O Museum. I played a woman, and she'd never played before, but boy, did she sort of see some inner little tricks you can do and some really cool combinations of cards.
That is
But you're right, the play testing, and we played it 175 times on official play testing. And then, of course, we played many more after that. And that was the whole purpose, because it's very sandboxy, and that you do have lots of choices for actions. I think the Raiders have 19 action cards of different lengths of minutes, and there's different ways to combine them. And then the way they interact, if you do it in a two-player game with the other cards, there's the matrix is incredibly complex. So through playtesting, we figured out a bunch of things. We had to change the wording on cards and things. So I'm just really thankful we did this much playtesting on the game.
Definitely. I think it's a lot more than people even expect nowadays. I think from start to finish on a war game to have 175 playthroughs before it even goes to print is amazing. You guys are really dedicated. That kind of ties into, I know you've talked about how you met Greg in a couple of your interviews, but I don't think many designers can say that they have a developer that's dedicated to the project with such close personal ties to the project.
I
How
know.
has like what are the unexpected benefits that you've run into of working with Greg, who's just like family members actually participated in the raid?
Yeah, and it's very strange. But I mean, I won't go into the details, but I think they're pretty amazing details that through Facebook, of all things, we ended up meeting because somebody knew somebody, somebody knew somebody else, somebody knew somebody else, and we ended up talking. And then he drove from Columbus, Ohio, to Indianapolis to meet me when I was at a percussion convention with 7,000 drummers. We stayed up till 3 in the morning playing on a big table that the hotel let us use in the lobby, getting all kinds of strange looks. And that was the first play test, very early version. And yeah, from that we became, not even a developer designer relationship, but friends. And his enthusiasm has really helped carry this project through. His knowledge, because he was already an expert on this raid and had read books I never ever heard about, and he had the family lore
And
going
because
through
his
this.
father wrote one of those books, right?
Yeah, his
Main book.
great great uncle was the main raider you ever hear about, really, is William Pittenger, because he wrote a series, what, 3 or 4 books. The first released before the Civil War was over, after he was released from in a prisoner of war exchange, and these raiders were awarded the first medals of honor ever awarded. And so he had, it was interesting to hear his books and to read his books at the time, but it was just from his point of view. As he researched it, William Pittenger did, in the years following the war, he interviewed, the other side, the Confederates that were involved, Fuller, Murphy, Kane, all that he could with them. And he wrote this final book in the 1880s, and that was called The Great Locomotive Chase. And so it's interesting to think, too, in the time context, 70 years later, Disney made a movie called The Great Locomotive Chase. And I like to say it's the most accurate, historically accurate Disney movie ever made, which might not be saying a whole lot. But that was 70 years apart, between when those happened. And so it's been very fun having Greg as part of the project. And he is very meticulous about things and about how things are said and the rules. He did a lot of the rules. And this could happen, 1 in a million chance. Okay, we have to cover it in our wording, that kind of thing. And he was also a reenactor, a Civil War reenactor. And he was in Andersonville, the movie, and he was also in Gettysburg. And I think
Oh,
he played as a reenactor, he played a Union soldier and a Confederate soldier in that, because a lot of people were used for both, obviously. And wow, he's toured the sites, he's studied it and all that. So we're going down, um, what is it, something like April 9th
I think that's
through
what
the through the 13th. We're going to northern Georgia for the April 12th anniversary, and every day we're going to see all the sites. We've already met some people on social media down there. We have scheduled to play the game.
oh,
We're
that's
trying to do this in museums and stations and all this sort of thing. So I'm really looking forward to that trip, because I'll see some things firsthand I'd only read about too.
the next thing. I've seen a couple of folks ask if you're really into trains and that's why you made this game, but your design portfolio is just so diverse. Like you design games that on topics like all different aspects of history and even like not really history. I mean, flat Earth is what I was thinking there. It's like it's inspired by history, but there's some fantasy to it too. Are you just a diehard train aficionado, or was it more the American Civil War connection that got you into this topic?
More the American Civil War. I'm not a train aficionado. I've never been. I'm more so now because I just think it's so interesting. And when you think about the Civil War, the two biggest pieces of technology that affected warfare at that time were trains because they could move large quantities of troops long distances very quickly, and the telegraph because communications opened up so much. They were not as ubiquitous as now by any means, um, where everybody has cell phones, even in warfare, whatever they're going to use. But because, as you'll notice in Engine Thieves, there are only 4 stations on the board that have telegraph stations, so, but it's still something you have to take into account, or that instantaneous communication will set you in very bad shape in the game
Definitely.
of the Raiders. Yeah.
Are there any other train games that you played beforehand or during development just to kind of see what else was out there that you really enjoyed?
No,
No.
I have never actually played Ticket to Ride even. I
I was
mean,
going to
that
say either 18
I have
X Games or
never.
Ticket to Ride.
No, but you would think,
I would think you would have Ticket to
but
Ride.
it's definitely a train game. We can't get around that, because you actually, as the Raiders, you drive your train, you make decisions about how fast you're going to go, how much wood you're going to use up, lots of things like that that you don't in a lot of train games. It's not a connect rail lines kind of thing. There's only one line with 126 spaces, each space being a mile, and it's not a pick up and deliver. It's a move along and destroy kind of game. So it's a different kind of train game, and there are other ones out there that could be made along the same line if you think about it. World War II, um, Civil War, even. You know, but to me, it's an interesting sort of combination. And when you combine things like chocolate and peanut butter, you don't always get a Reese cup, right? So
Right.
especially I'm curious, the first time the Reese cups came out, were they popular? Or was that what? That sounds horrible. Well, maybe I'll try it. And now I love it, and I feel the game's a little like that because it's sort of a new kind of combination of features. Some people even, I tried to post something on one war game group on Facebook, and the administrator came back. I guess he looked at the art, which is vibrant and colorful and not at all like, oh my gosh, everybody's about to die kind of artwork, and said, oh, this isn't a train game. I mean, a war game. You can't post it here. And I had to finally show him the combat table before he would let it go up on his site. He said, okay.
That's surprising. There are a lot of war games that have more cheerful artwork on them.
Well, more nowadays they do, but if this is somebody that's grew up over the decades, they're not as used to seeing that, and they're sort of maybe a little bewildered
That's
by it. And so it's a different perspective. Somebody your age and somebody my age, or maybe older.
I do
So
think
too.
the Zilla Blitz video did a great job of talking about like the unique combination of mechanics and the kind of the juxtaposition of like the tactical nature with more like the simulation level mechanics. Um,
He did.
Talking about just it being a train game, but not like other train games, with the other pursuit modes. I mean, we talked about that in the update a couple of days ago, but like, what's the longest you've seen somebody go without a train in this train game? Like playing as a CSA player, like on horses, on pole car.
Well, it's possible if you're playing two-player, and I'm doing that because I'm trying to think about the feelings of each player too. And that's, what's this all about? With all these war games, we're trying to give somebody the feeling that they really are involved with this at some level, either general or whatever level we're doing this, right? And they have to have sort of fun doing it. It's like, it's interesting. I just saw people talking about a Pearl Harbor game or something, and thinking, well, how did they do that? Because how do you have fun if you're the Americans in that? So that's a typical kind of thing. And the Raiders were caught because they ran out of fuel because they were pursued so closely historically. But there is in this game, you can get ahead of all the burning bridges, and they're stuck running or using a pole car that they can't catch you. So what we have to sort of balance that are those event cards. And the event cards are all kinds of little things they might pull out at different stations or just different situations to make it all of a sudden a lot more dangerous, even if Fuller, Murphy, and Kane, who are the conductor, the supervisor, and the engineer, if they can't quite catch up to them or something. So the Raiders are never safe completely in this game, no matter how far behind the pursuers get, because there's always something up ahead, and there's time. They're racing against time too.
Oh,
But
definitely.
but to answer your question, if usually the worst the pursuers will do is get about three-quarters of the way up the board in pursuit and they can't really close the chase. So that's possible. That would have been very possible. It's exactly what the actual historical raiders were counting on. They were not counting on anybody running after them. They were counting on somebody going on a horseback like they did back to Marietta and sending a telegraph message. So they cut the wires pretty quickly, but they weren't counting on anybody coming up. And then when they went through the station called Etowah, there was a little company train, just a little engine called the Yona sitting on a siding. And they looked at that as they passed it, said, we didn't know that was there. Said, nah, there's no way anybody's going to get there and chase us with that. And they did. So that's, typical war game, or typical life game. You make all your plans, and then, the environment has an impact and a say on what happens.
Yeah, FMC, they really have just like that dedication fully in the mechanics, because they'll even like the swim across the rivers and risk drowning to come after you. I think it's so interesting to see all the different ways that they'll keep going on the chase.
Yeah, I call them sort of the Terminators. They're just like will not stop for anything. But and that had to be extrapolated, out of their actual historical actions, which they didn't give up. They would run, they do whatever they had to do to keep that chase going. And so I had to say, well, what happened if a bridge had been burned? Well, they'd ford it or they'd swim it or whatever, but you do have to roll to see if any of them drown. And that's one of the stranger things. You want to hear a statistically odd thing, and I'm sure everybody's getting out their calculator now. You roll a d6 for each of the three pursuers if they swim, and a 6 on any of those means they drown. And then Fuller, he was the most athletic and the most determined. If one of his special abilities is if he drowns, you get to roll one more time. And so you'd need another 6 for him to really drown. That for that one roll. Twice in all the play testing, somebody rolled 3 sixes, rolled the fourth d6, and got a 6 again. So they all drowned. But the game's not over there, because there's still a lot behind them. And if there's and if they've ever sent a telegraph message, then it's definitely not over. It's probably over for the Raiders.
One of the things that I was thinking about yesterday actually is that sometimes when we get a multiplayer design in from designer, we'll say, oh, like, could you add a solo mode to that? Because we have so many solo gamers in our community. But for Engine Thieves, it was the opposite. It started as a solo game and went 2-player. So, like, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced trying to turn a solitaire game into a back and forth face-to-face game?
All right. To be honest, it first started as a two-player.
Oh, okay.
And so when we did the action cards, when I came up with that system where you have to choose your actions out of 19 different actions, and each one takes a different amount of minutes and they have to equal 15. So you have a lot of decisions. I imagined in some way that there would also be that for the Confederates.
Okay.
And in this case, taking agency over Fuller, Murphy, and Kane. And but as I started thinking about it, said, this is really a story about a raid. And so let me just turn it into solo game, because all the companies want solo games, right? Before I even met any of you at Compass. And so that's what I did. And then so I played with you, and you said, we need a two-player version. And so it was a little bit, it wasn't wholly back to the drawing board, because I knew where I wanted to go. But from there, that's your idea to do that spurred so many other ideas, because that gave us an opportunity for one to integrate in the fact about the medals of honor, because this was, like I said earlier, this was the first time medals of honor had been awarded to U.S. soldiers, and just as a quick sidebar, that was not an easy decision because Congress made this medal, and there were a lot of arguments against it. People said, like Winfield Scott, he said, no, no, we want people to be fighting because they love their country, not for some medal. And this is so European, we don't want to be like the Europeans. So that's where that came from. But it did come through, and they were awarded the first ones. Um, so we have a system when they do things of daring and cause destruction, they earn Medal of Honor counters, and then we had to think, well, what are we going to do with these? They earned them. Now we got to cash them in on something. And remember when you played, and I'm not trying to tell on you, Brittany, but you sort of got caught somewhere and sort of got slaughtered in the combat.
Yeah.
And that's okay. It's happened to all of us. But that's what we said. Well, let's mitigate that a little bit. You'd had an idea, maybe just soften it a little bit, so you can turn in one counter for every combat die roll, or dice roll, to change one pip on one die, which mitigates the combat. And that was, I want to say, that was Greg's idea.
Yes, I think
to do that. And I said, let's do something with the combat. He said, let's just do that. And then we tested that several different versions before we came up on what it is. But the other thing was the event cards. If you're playing 2-player, then somebody's going to get upset if they're Fuller Murphy Kane and they're too far back, right? And they look like they don't have a chance, and they're playing half the game with seemingly no chance. So that's why we added the event cards, which most of them are positive for Fuller Murphy and Kane, and lots of I'm gonna play this, I got you, that kind of stuff. I like that in games myself. So that's why we added those, and then to sort of balance those are the medals of honor too. So that's how all that came about. So those were some of the challenges once we went with the 2-player version. And it's interesting, Zilla Blitz said it's obviously a solo game with a 2-player game tacked onto it. And it's, exactly right, because that's how it went. But I really enjoy the 2-player game personally. It's really fun to match wits, and play is so simultaneous because you're both thinking about your cards, putting them down, turning them over at the same time, and checking to see whose action has priority. And so there's really not downtime. It's not you go, I go, anything like that. So I'm happy with the way the 2-player came out, and thank you very much for pushing me in that direction.
I think you have Bill to thank for that one, but I'll take the credit.
Okay, all right, thanks, Bill.
So, what lessons have you learned from the development and production process on Engine Thieves that you want to apply to your next Compass titles?
We had a situation with a fantastic artist and game artist who, from my understanding, in Euro games, and he's from Europe and does that, he doesn't want to interact with the designer too much. And so that's the thing that I would have to put my foot down in some fashion if that situation ever came up again, and be more involved with that, because we just lost a lot of development time on that. But that was, I think, an interesting situation that we all learned from, and but the end result was worth it because he did a really good job, and it's eye-catching art. It's looking great on the videos that we're seeing and everything. But that's one of the biggest things. Greg's take on the rules, because I wrote the rules and I write them, and then he says, oh, but there's this little situation here, there's a little situation there, so he wrote them super meticulously. Then you went back and edited what we had done. That was actually a good process in it all, because we did the general part, and he did the really, really super specific part. And then you went back and said, okay, if I'm a gamer, this is what I'd want to see, and let's take out this duplication in the production part. So I think that worked well. And but the biggest thing, I guess, really is that with an artist of any artist, then we whatever they do is probably not going to be exactly the way all your prototypes worked and the pieces and the looks. And so I just got to be ready to recognize that as quickly as possible and start changing rules and my understanding of the counters and make sure they're not going off in some direction that changes how the game really plays and feels. And so that's what I learned. And uh, that's you're exactly right. Learning is a process. We're never. I can see that I have learned that I'm never going to stop learning. With no matter how many games we do together, I know there's going to be something to learn out of that. So
And I do think with the components changing from the prototype, that was mostly me. That was the sideboard. I love how the sideboard came out, but yes, that did involve rewriting quite a few rules to reference
yeah,
that.
well, yeah, and that was a time in where your life you deservedly needed a little extra time off, and and so we ping pong around a bit, but we got the job done. And I hope I didn't lose any more hair than I'm naturally losing anyway, and I hope nobody else did either with Compass over that. But you had some great ideas, which I appreciate more the more the game is in my hands now. And your idea for doing the time track going around that looks like a clock. It's very thematic. I'm very much into immersive theme, you know, and your the alert level as it goes up, it looks like the control handle of an for an engine going faster or whatever it does. And I think that was really very cool. And now with the new size, we enlarged the dashboards and everything. Once we saw a physical prototype, it's come out very cool, and everything works really well. And I sit there kicking myself. Well, why didn't I think to just make it something like a dashboard in the prototype? I didn't because I had all these pieces scattered around, and you collated all that together. Thank you for that too.
Oh, thank you. So speaking of that workflow that you said you do the general and Greg does the specific and then I'll do the editing. Is Greg going to work with you on some of your other projects?
He's doing the St. Albans raid,
Oh, okay, great.
and that's he's developer on that, and he's been play testing and playing in Ohio again, while I do in the Maryland DC area, and we've already both gone through the rules a number of times, so it's been handed in, until it has to be. Everything's always open to a little change or something, but really happy with that. And for those that don't know what the heck I'm talking about when I say St. Albans raid, the Engine Thieves was not the first American Civil War small unit covert action raid game that I did. The first was actually raid on St. Albans, Vermont. The Confederates actually raided with about 20 raiders into St. Albans, Vermont, stole about today's equivalent of $4 million out of the banks in this small town, but it was a big railroad town. So they were also, just like engine thieves, chased by railroad workers when they escaped. And they tried to burn the town down, just like the engine thieves tried to burn bridges. And neither were very successful because of being very rainy that day and everything was wet. And but again, the narrative of the St. Albans raid is really interesting because not only were they pursued and they escaped back to Canada where they came from, and there was a trial with a crooked judge who the Confederates bribed to let them all go. Then the British freaked out and said, "No, no, get them back, get them back." So they got some of them back, and it then involved in a covert mission to send uh, what do you call couriers, spy couriers, back down to Richmond to get these documents from Jefferson Davis, which of course they were post dated and everything, predated when they really were, whatever you call it. And then they took them back, and it said yes, they were Confederates, true Confederates, so that they'd have to be let loose. And it was a Confederate sanctioned raid because there was no law in Canada that did not allow raiders from another country to invade the U.S. at the time. So very crazy narrative, and I was happy with the way that game came out. But that's how Engine Thieves came about, because I tried to say, well, now there's got to be another raid with about 20 raiders going behind enemy lines, stealing something, trying to burn things, chased by railroad workers. And then I remember being, what, 5 or 6 years old, sitting, about this close up to the black and white TV we had at the time, which was fuzzy and you could hardly see it, and watching the Great Locomotive Chase. So I started researching it, and it came from there.
That's one of the things that I just love about your designs. You take a look at all the possible what ifs and you make it so the players can actively use them and you want them to use them. Nothing drives me more crazy when I'm trying out a design with somebody and I use something like, oh, I'll use a nuke. And they're like, well, you're not supposed to use the nukes. And I'm like, but why are they in the game then? There's like
Yeah.
a gentleman's agreement. You're not supposed to use the what ifs. You're supposed to play historically. No, I'm gonna play as much chaos as possible. And that's what Wes's designs are great for.
Well, hopefully, but you do hint on an interesting point for play testing. So you'd be really a perfect play tester, because a lot of people would make an historical game, and then they're so interested in seeing how actual it follows history, that it's really easy to make it almost always follow history every time. And if you're going to make it a game, you have to think of all the possibilities. So somebody that comes in like you with an attitude of, I want to create chaos, I want to do everything different than they really did, and try something, daring. That's the kind of play testers everybody needs too. And you can't just look at the ones who always act rationally and know the history. If you know the history, it influences what you do. I'm convinced of that. So you're right. That's perfect. And with Engine Thieves, you can try a lot of different strategies that they didn't do and see what works, and get very reckless. I've seen certain people do, always, if there was a train in the next station, they'd always still just go speed out as fast as they could towards the next station, hoping that train wouldn't move. Because if it does, it might collide. And the faster you're going, it will. And I've seen other ones that said, covert heck, I'm going to attack Confederates in every station I run into. And that doesn't, they do great for a little while, very often, but then you run into that one large unit that you just can't kill, and you're sitting there begging to surrender at a certain point. But yeah.
So I think we're gonna maybe do one more question and wrap things up. But we were talking about your diverse design portfolio. We've talked about both like Civil War games. Do you want to talk a little bit about Flat Earth so people know what's coming up?
Sure. I'm wondering if I can pick this laptop up and show you, because you put out a call on Facebook of all things, and I'd just gotten one game with you all, right? Engine Thieves, and you put out a call. Somebody, designers got any ideas? Pitch them to me. So I pitched all the other ideas that you've now signed, other ideas you haven't signed, and games that are sitting around in the closet around the corner and things like that. And we'll talk about it another day. But then I looked up at my wall, because I have all kinds of historical posters, and I only have one print of a piece of art, and this is it. I'm going to try. Can you all see it
Yep, there we go.
right there? And it's just, this really resonated with me. It's these, you know, age of exploration ships teetering off a waterfall, and even people in a rowboat trying to furiously get away from the end of the waterfall. And at the bottom of the picture, you can see the little tassels from the top of one of the masts. Like one ship's already gone off, and the name of the picture is "I Told You So," and it's just so appropriate because time after time we learn, we as daring as we are and as technologically as advanced we are for any time period, something doesn't go right and things weren't what we thought they were. And I'm not a flat earther, but it's just intriguing to think about that. So I wrote in my last thing to you, how about flat earth? And what if in the exploration, the age of exploration, for various peoples around the world, the earth had been flat, and what would have happened? And then I told you more detail, and that's what we're going to do. And I think we've come together with some interesting um, components with this that are have not really been used to any extent that people know about, if at all. And so I'm excited about that. I've been still play testing it, still playing around with a few little systems because I'm trying to make it a better gamer's game where you don't have so many tables and you don't, you find out results real quickly and things like that. Because I don't think, I think it can, I think it'd be a big crossover game. I
I
think
agree.
it's a fantasy, it's a historical fantasy is what I call it.
Yeah, I can't wait to check it out at Spring Expo.
Well, it's you don't look for my art, but we'll have that prototype even more fully developed than you last saw.
Great. Anything else you would like to share on Engine Thieves before we sign off, or you think you're about set?
Wow. I just hope people give it a chance. And in my opinion, from having played it and not just designed it, it's like anybody that thinks they have a Civil War collection, this ought to be in there. And I've got number two coming out with you all, the raid on St. Albans, Vermont, the Confederate raid. And I think I feel like, and humbly feel like, that we're starting a new kind of game, of Civil War game. And that's a small unit, man to man, action, small covert raid thing. And there are many more I can think of. So I actually hope that somebody else will pick this up and do their own game, and that's on a different event, because there are others. And the story, we're all about telling stories, like I said earlier, and the stories that are in there, the human stories, are just fantastic. And we're not they weren't quite at the point where everybody was being killed in war without ever getting anywhere close to seeing who the other enemy is. And man to man and covert action raids bring the action all that much closer. And so I hope the Civil War people will give this a chance, those that love the games like that, and check it out, because I think it's something they need in their collection.
I would agree. All right. Thank you for joining me, Wes. And if everybody else, there's a couple days left in the Kickstarter. I'll have a link down in the video description. And thanks for watching.
Thank you very much.